And a good morning, the apex of our week. We call it Wednesday. Well, if you've got a 5-day work week and you have weekends off, then the apex being the middle, of course, would be Wednesday. If you're one of those people who's working, obviously, some sort of swing shift and you work odd days or you work weekends, then forget about it. Bill Colley with you this morning, and I thank you very much for joining us on the program today. Look, I'm going to do an opening of the show pretty much in this first segment today that is very much dovetailing with what we were talking about yesterday, and that is how so many various things that are going on in our country and in our world right now are really tied into maybe a much larger and more nefarious effort to try to bring America down to size, and that includes the American people. We really spent the last hour on that yesterday on the show, and I'd like to add to that a little bit off the top of the program today, just to let you know, though. Coming up after 9 o'clock news, we have a candidate for Twin Falls City Council joining us in studio. Nikki Boyd will be here for about 10, 15 minutes and also available to take some of your questions if you have them during the course of her visit. She's just about, not quite the last person we're going to see in studio, but pretty close to the last candidate because, frankly, by Monday of next week, it's just I think it's a little too late in the game, and I think it's unfair to have a candidate in at the last minute. And if that candidate says something inflammatory about an opponent, then there's really no time to respond. So those visits from candidates are wrapping up this week on the program. Also, Trip Family Medicine between 8:30 and 9 o'clock this morning. Looking forward to that. That's coming up in just about 20-some minutes. I wanted to start out, though. We had a segment yesterday about firearms on the air and efforts of people in government to attempt to take guns away from the American people, even though Second Amendment. You know, a couple of days ago, we had that news conference with Chuck Schumer and his comedian niece, Amy Schumer. I mean, there's a real expert on the Second Amendment. And they were talking about how we have to take guns away from people. And Senator Schumer, who always reminds me a little bit of Fozzie Bear from the old Muppet Show, Senator Schumer said, you know, the First Amendment is not absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded movie house. Well, that's true. And you also can't go out and shoot your neighbors dead for no apparent reason. So the Second Amendment already has that limit on it. You can own firearms, but if you go out and you break the law with your firearm, you could go to jail. I mean, we all know that. That's pretty apparent. But they like to try to smudge that, you know, and just mess that picture up a little bit so people don't really follow along with what they're doing. And then we told you yesterday, the Washington Post and the New York Times, among America's most liberal newspapers, the Times obviously is. The Post isn't far behind. They had been reporting that 29 people who had concealed carry permits over the last decade had committed mass murders. Well, that would be any homicide involving more than one person. That could be two. And yet, when you have 14 million people walking around with concealed carry permits, the actual percentage is so small. We were explaining it was not just 1%, it wasn't even 0.5%, it wasn't even 0.1%. And yet they throw out the number 29 and people go, wow, that's terrible, that's awful. But then when you see the percentage, and here's the thing, modern media doesn't explain all of that. In other words, there's a sin of omission going on there. And in my church, that's called about the same thing as a lie. And so you understand what they're trying to do. They're working slowly on the American people, on emotional arguments too as well, to whittle away and get rid of the opposition. The opposition that basically says Mullen Lobby, which translates come and take them. Here's something I wanted to share with you today. And it's happening in probably many places, but this one is from Pennsylvania, Amish country in Pennsylvania. Now, growing up really close to the Pennsylvania state line in my hometown, about a quarter of our population to a third of the population happen to be Amish, so I have a good understanding of their lifestyle. Writer at the Daily Caller says an Amish man filed a federal suit in Pennsylvania last week because he was not allowed to purchase a gun without proper photo identification. Now, that's according to the Washington Post, which was probably cheerleading for the denial. In Amish tradition, practicing members cannot have their photo taken. According to the suit, Andrew Hertzler, the plaintiff, quote, has a sincerely held religious belief that prevents him from knowingly and willingly having his photograph taken and stored, unquote. The case, as the Post points out, highlights the tension between the Second Amendment and the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993, which was established to avoid cases such as this. Hertzler, in order to enjoy his Second Amendment rights, would have to violate his faith. So he contacted one of his U.S. senators, Pat Toomey. Toomey contacted the government and said, hey, what's going on? He contacted the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Toomey heard back from ATF and sent Hertzler the following response. Quote, as the enclosed response from ATF states, federal firearm laws require photo identification when purchasing a firearm. There are no exceptions to this federal requirement, unquote. Now, if his name had been Hassan instead of Hertzler, he might have the Justice Department stepping in on his behalf and filing the lawsuit for him. He wouldn't even have to do it. As you understand, we also talked yesterday about the two Muslim truck drivers who took a job where they would have to deliver alcohol, and then they took the job in advance, and then they filed suit because they were fired when they refused, and the Justice Department is backing them up. So apparently, if you're a Muslim, then of course we can't violate your faith. But if you're Amish or a Christian of any kind, well, don't worry about it. The government will come and take its big foot and step on you. Meanwhile, more to all of this. This comes from Bill Whittle. Some of you may be familiar with Bill Whittle from any of his television appearances. Also, he has his own channel on YouTube where he discusses various political issues of the day. I came across this morning just before going on air, and I had to share a little of it. I've cut it down. It's a 6-minute video. I've cut it down to 2 shorter pieces. But he's talking about media reaction to all of the latest gun shootings in this country. That is, what they call mass shootings, Oregon being perhaps the latest, just a couple of weeks back. And he says, the blame always seems to be not on anything else, but simply on the firearm.
Well, in the aftermath of yet another mass shooting, the father of the unnamed murderer, unnamed by me anyway, said that he had no idea how his son managed to stockpile his arsenal of guns. If he'd not been able to get a hold of 13 guns, then this wouldn't have happened, said the father of the mass murderer. That's what guns are, the killers. Simple as that. Simple as that, he said. Now, he's not alone in this belief, by the way, that the guns are the killers. All of liberal America believes this to be true. And if it is true, then we as a nation need to follow this idea to its logical conclusion, which forces conservatives like me to ask some questions that we may not like the answers to. For instance, what made these 5 guns go on a murder spree while at the same time almost 300 million other guns were either peacefully resting or protecting their owners?
Very good question. And then he came to a conclusion that media is not actually following. He said there is a common denominator in all of these shootings. And he said it is being ignored by Lefty.
I don't think he handles adversity.
That sounds like somebody completely else. We do have Bill Whittle here. And what I'm going to do is tell you he's talking about absentee fathers. Fathers who may not exist in a child's life whatsoever, or, as he goes on to explain, you may have a situation where you have a father who may be involved in the child's life, but only on the margins. Even, you could be living in the same home, but if your father ignores you, you've got a serious problem. And that's the point he's getting to with a common denominator.
The reasons the liberals have to blame the steal is because the single great correlator of violent prison inmates is not, unfortunately for the narrative, the offender's economic background or their race or the neighborhoods they came from. The one thing that virtually all of them have in common, these violent offenders, is that they are fatherless boys. The murderer who shot up the church in Charleston, the Boston Marathon murderers, virtually all of them are these fatherless, bitter, angry boys, and they're going to keep coming, and their numbers are going to increase, not decrease, as they, like the Oregon shooter, specifically look for the attention and the validation that they did not receive from their absent or very weak fathers.
In other words, and since we have more and more dissolution of American families, you'll have more. There was a study done some years ago about rogue elephants. Rogue elephants are often the elephants who are left behind after hunters take down their fathers. And then these elephants, which have very few influences from male elephants in their lives, then become very dangerous in the wild, and they become violent. They attack human beings. This is something that social scientists ignore. If you find a study that backs up what Lefty wants in the wild, Lefty will say, well, this could be applicable to humanity. But when you see something happen in the wild that pretty much proves their policies obviously are hurting this culture, then they try and ignore that. The president yesterday spoke in front of the Police Chiefs Association at a convention, and he was talking in favor of taking people's guns away. He said Tuesday he is not trying to take everybody's guns away. Moments after he spoke out in favor of more gun regulations, such as expanded background checks and a ban on so-called assault weapons. And again, what the heck is an assault weapon? Well, they were talking about something with an adjustable stock and a grip. And that's it. So why is that, as a firearm, worse than any other firearm? And how many people actually own those firearms with adjustable stocks? Few. People don't go out and rob banks with those. They don't shoot many neighbors with those. They don't go shoot up schools with those. So we keep hearing assault weapons, and of course the general public, which may not have any idea what he's talking about, they're thinking, my gosh, they must have some great big 50 caliber slung over their shoulder, just like a Rambo, Johnny Rambo, and they're running through the woods, shooting up everything in sight, including human beings. That's the impression that he and his fellow travelers and media would like to give you. A writer at the Washington Times, Dave Boyer, says, speaking at the annual convention of the International Association of Police Chiefs, the president devoted a large portion of his address to enacting more gun regulations. Government always wants more regulations. Quote, we're talking about common sense measures to make sure criminals don't get them, to make sure background checks work, to make sure that we're protecting ourselves, unquote, he said. You know, criminals won't get them if they're in prison. This is the same guy who was opening up prison doors across the country and releasing criminals onto the streets. Oh, you know, he only possessed about 20 kilos of cocaine and shot dead a couple of DEA agents. I think that he should be allowed to go because those cocaine laws in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan and his pals were draconian. Therefore, we turn more criminals out onto the street. If you don't want criminals to have guns, then get rid of the criminals. Pretty simple, isn't it? 8:18, Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The president framed the issue, the writer says, partly as a bid to make police safer in the line of duty. And this has got to be fact-checked. Quote, in states with high gun ownership, police officers are 3 times more likely to be murdered than in states with low gun ownership, unquote, Mr. Obama said. Of course, the latest homicide that took place, a police killing, was in New York City, where they have very, very strict gun laws compared to, let's say, Missouri, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. It seems to happen in places like New York City much more frequently than anywhere else, maybe because you have a lot more criminals there. Again, it comes back to criminals, not necessarily the number of handguns. It'll be about 48 hours. Someone will fact-check that statement, and it'll be buried on page A17 of all of your major liberal newspapers. It appears that President Obama, his nose was growing while he was speaking to the police chiefs, and we don't actually want you to read this, so it's down here at the very bottom of the page, on page A17, just below the news about debentures being sold on Wall Street. Yeah. And so, therefore, you will be taking what he says as gospel. That's the hope, anyway, of folks, the fellow travelers in mainstream media. We have a short break coming up. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning. Speaking of police officers, President not actually winning many friends and influencing many people at that convention. We'll talk about that coming up in just a few minutes. Seems, of course, he sits there and says, guns kill police officers, and by the way, you're all a bunch of racist bigots, and I hope my fellow black Americans conk you over the head. Thank you very much for your time. You know that police officer in South Carolina? Is it South Carolina? The resource officer, they're saying, oh, he was mean to that student, and he must be fired, and we can never work again, we've got to make him go live in a cave. Because, he must have been walking around the school that morning thinking to himself, I wonder if there's some Negro students I can rough up. Being as a Southerner, he's probably using that type of old language, right? Well, actually, in mainstream media's mind, he's probably using a word even much more foul. So he was walking the halls, and he peered at a window, and he saw this teenage black girl sitting at her desk, and he said, here's my opportunity. He burst through the door, he ran over, knocked her out of her seat, and he dragged her across the floor. That's the liberal narrative on what happened there. I have a suspicion, on the other hand, when I heard that the girl refused to leave the classroom after she was being disruptive. What is he supposed to do? Well, okay, you can sit here and keep, smoking crack cocaine and mouthing off to the teacher and calling other students names and pounding on your neighbors. I'll just have to go put a file in the report in the principal's office, and then we won't like you very much, and you may not graduate. Well, she refused to leave the room. She was being disruptive. Students turned on the telephone as soon as she started wrestling with the police officer. We don't know what happened beforehand. Oh, but how dare he? He's got to get her out of that classroom so other kids can learn. If she doesn't want to be there, give her a pickaxe and a shovel and tell her to dig ditches. You know what? I would think that most of these nasty children, if you sent them out, sentenced them to 365 days digging ditches along the highway, and if their parents complain, parents can go out and do it too as well. You will see some attitude adjustment in this country really fast. 824. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Thanks for joining us today. 36, it feels it. I was outside just before the 8 o'clock news, and it could be better. We'll put it that way. Speaking, by the way, of weather, it has cooled off. We've been telling you all summer about Tint Lady and how Tint Lady can put tints in your windows and actually help keep your home cooler and save you money on that electric bill so you don't have to run that AC unit all the time. However, window tints are also good in the wintertime. We have a lot of sunshine still here. And that sunshine can actually bleach drapes, and it can bleach your carpet, your furniture, photographs on the wall, maybe even your wallpaper. So you might want to consider getting window tints installed now. And, of course, they can benefit you as well in the summer. Tint Lady will do a free estimate at your office, your home, even your automobile, and they do paint protection as well. You can find TintLadyIdaho.com. That's online, TintLadyIdaho.com, or call 736-8469. 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls. Open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Saturday by appointment only, closed Sundays. 25 years nearly in experience now, locally owned and operated. And remember, don't squint, get tint. So I was talking a little bit about this situation with the police officer still being hammered and constantly hammered in this country. And you wonder, where does it stop? So Mr. Obama yesterday was speaking to police at a convention in, I think it was Chicago, his hometown, and he took time out to tell them that, if they didn't shape up, I guess he is going to come get them.
I refuse to believe that the only choice we have is to either ignore circumstances of racial bias or make it impossible for police officers to do their job. You know as well as I do that the tensions in some communities, the feeling that law enforcement isn't always applied fairly, those sentiments don't just come out of nowhere.
Excuse me, he's telling them, you're all a bunch of racist bigots, and you need to step aside, and we'll have anarchy in the streets. And if you see a young man 6.5 feet tall stealing cigars and roughing up the shop owner, don't confront him. Allow him to continue doing that simply because of the color of his skin. He's already a victim, and we don't need you interfering. We have a caller with us. Telephone number 736-0300. 736-0300. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You're up next, and you're on the air.
You ignorant buffoon. How can you even say that young lady was smoking crack? You fat, lard individual. Can't even, oh, my God. And it's okay to hit women.
Did you tell me, is she swinging at the cop?
You don't have a brain.
This guy claims to be a Roman Catholic, by the way. I think he drives a truck for Catholic Charities, which is, where they dump off a lot of the dead weight and Democrats who can't find jobs in the area. If this young lady is taking a swing at a police officer, actually, if a police officer comes across a young lady robbing a bank in downtown Twin Falls, is he going to refrain from smacking her to get her under control? Or is that considered to be sexist as well? Or if a police officer shows up at a domestic dispute and a woman takes a bottle and swings it at him, should the police officer stand there and take it because that would be sexist? Where does that kid come from? I mean, first of all, well, that's a story for another day. Some people out there think the world owes them a living, and he's one of them. You're up next, and you're on the air.
Yeah, Bill, everything you said this morning, it's evidence to me that you didn't come out here to take Kelly's place. You came out here to take Jill's place and promote this police state. That girl was wrong in what she did. There's no question about that. But when we call these guys pigs when they act like pigs, you get all upset about it. This guy didn't have to treat her that way.
We don't know the full story, do we?
We don't.
I said that.
He still acted like a pig. He had no right to do what he did.
So, in other words, he should have just left the room and let it go on.
No, he shouldn't. You know that's not what I'm saying. You're just trying to support this police state.
No, I don't. You know what? You're trying to support anarchy, bud.
No, I'm not. I want these cops to keep their oath, to do their duty.
Which is what? To walk away from crime and walk away from someone disruptive?
He could have treated her like he was supposed to treat her as a lawful police officer.
Please, I want you to refrain from your bad behavior and remain in your seat and tell the teacher you're sorry. That would have worked, right?
Good. Promote the police state, Bill.
Oh, police state. All right. You know what? No more speeding tickets. No more arrests for bank robbery. No more arrests of rapists. By gosh, because we might hurt somebody's feelings. You're up next. We got about 25 seconds.
Well, I swear this sounds like this valley's really got the liberal mindset. That girl, she punched the officer in the neck, and she deserved what she got. That's all I have to say about it.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very much for the call. You know, police state. You know, there may be some notions about a police state in this country. It's coming from above. But you know what? Your individual officer on the street or on patrol or working in a school has a really tough job. And this notion that they're supposed to stand there and let someone sock him in the chops is beyond me. When I was a kid, I was told if you take a poke at a police officer, he's not just going to maybe wrestle you down. He may use actually not just equal force, but greater force to subdue you. Too many police officers have been killed because of ignoramuses thinking that they need to stand back and then police saying, gee, maybe I better. Because of fear, of course, that they'll lose their jobs if they actually do them. Trip Family Medicine next. Better health with Trip Family Medicine on the way between 8:30 and 9 o'clock this morning, right here on Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX.